Yeah.
And if you don't have it, I've got it saved on my GitHub, so you can download it from tinyurl.com /ACM-roll2. Okay. Yeah, if anybody has any questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand if you want to flag down someone to help you walk around, or if you have more general question, feel free to ask. Okay, so here's our project from last week. I'm just going to go ahead and switch this back to what it was and open up the scene from last week. So that should be under scenes in your file system over here. Scenes, and it's called level 1. So I'm just going to open that up and make sure that everything's still pretty much there as it was last week. And if you want, you can just test out the level, make sure everything still works, because we're going to be building off of this same script for this week. Cool. Okay, so is everyone at this point? Does anybody need more time or need help? Yeah. Okay, are you just downloading?
I'm just waiting for my...
You need to do its thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, see?
It should be called level 1.
Yeah, I chose scene 1.
Okay. All right, and so now we need to know how to switch between scenes, because it's all great. We've got the one scene set up, but it'd be awesome to have a menu and maybe have a way to flow between different scenes once you complete a level. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and create another scene. So in order to do that, we're going to be on our scenes folder here. We're going to right-click, go to Create, and then we're going to click Create Scene. So it's going to give us a new scene in the folder, and I'm just going to name this Menu. And then to open up the scene, we'll just double-click on it, and it should load right here. Just got a blank scene like we're used to seeing. All right, so once we're here, we want to have some sort of UI system for the user to click on and advance to the only level we have available. So we're going to create an object in the scene. We're going to click Create, and then UI, and this time we're going to select Button. So you see it creates a little button down in the corner. I'm going to rename this button Start. It's not super important. But then if you select a little drop down for the text component that's a part of the button, I'm just going to rename that Start as well. So you'll see down here it changed the text on the button.
Where was it on the create?
So in the scene hierarchy, you've got your canvas, and then the button, which I renamed Start.
Under the create.
Oh, sorry. So it's Create, and then UI, and then Button. It's about a third of the way down. So now you can see we've got this right here, this little start button. I'm going to go ahead and resize it a bit. We can do that just by clicking on the button here and changing the scale. So I'm going to scale this up to 2 and 2. and I'm going to move it in the scene view. So to select the button to focus on it, click on the start object, and then mouse into the scene and press F, and it should focus on it. I'm just going to switch which direction I'm looking at, and then move it up just so it's right in the middle of the screen. Does anybody have any questions at this point? So does everybody have the button on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so now that we've got the button in the scene centered up a little bit and looking a little bit better, we need to hook it up to some script to do something, because if we click on it right now, nothing's going to happen. So we need to create a game object in the scene that's going to handle our scene switching for us. So I'm going to go here and click Create, and this time Create Empty. And I'm just going to rename this Scene Manager. And reset its position. This is not super important since it's not going to actually do anything in the scene. There's nothing going to be childed under it. It's just basically going to be a holder for our script. And so then once you've got the empty object, I'm going to add component, and I'm going to add a new script. I'm just going to call it Scene Manager. And so create and add. And then before I open it up, last week there were some issues with people like moving the scripts around and it would like resave them. There's a bit of a quirk between Unity and Visual Studio where if you move, for example, if I move to Scene Manager into scripts to organize it, but it was open at the same time in Visual Studio, sometimes Visual Studio won't alert you to the fact that it's been moved, and so if you save it, it'll create a duplicate of it. So just be aware of that when you're organizing the project. It's good to keep everything in its own folder for clarity, especially when you're working on group projects, but just be aware that Visual Studio will sometimes try to stab you in the back with that. So now that we've got this attached, I'm going to open up the Scene Manager script. All right. Okay, so once you get to this point, we're just going to create, it's going to be a very quick script just to switch the scenes. And so in order to access the scene switching component, we need to add another using statement up here. So we're going to add using Unity Engine, Unity Engine, not editor, dot scene management. And then if anybody's not interested in following along with the scripting, the finished scripts are available at tinyurl/game-scripts. Does anybody want me to write that on the board? Okay. All right, and so then once we add that import, we aren't going to have to use the start or update methods at all, because the purpose of the scene manager, it's sort of just going to be a script that sits there and waits for it to be called. It's not going to be running in sync with the scene or anything, so it doesn't really need to know about any of like Unity's built-in functions like start. So all we're going to do is we're going to create one method, and so this is going to be public, and it's important that this is public because otherwise it's going to throw some errors and it's going to be hard to fix later. Public void, and I'm just going to call it load. No, don't do that. And it's just going to take in one string, scene name. And so then within the function, all we do is call scene manager, dot load scene. And then we're going to pass in scene name. And so what this function is going to do, if I did everything correct, is it's going to take in a string, whatever our scene that we want to load, and then it's just going to pass it off to the scene manager and tell it to load the scene. Okay. Okay. And so then once you've got that set up, we need to attach this to the button. Oh, I realized what was wrong. Okay. Sorry about this. So it turns out that Scene Manager is actually the name required by Unity. So if you say that, I'd like messed up and created duplicate namespaces. So if you just go in here and rename this script to, how about Scene Controller, and then in Visual Studio, it'll probably either delete it or keep it still there. Just go into the file system on the side, open up Scene Controller, and then you just need to change the class name as well to Scene Controller. Okay, and if anybody wants me to repeat that, please let me know because I'm really sorry that was a somewhat confusing mistake. Yeah.
You also have to change it on the below.
Okay, no, so Scene Manager is a Unity specific class. That's what I'm trying to call. I was silly and tried to create another class also called Scene Manager. And so it's important especially that you rename the class here, because if this doesn't match the file name, then it's going to not be able to compile. Yeah.
Does it just compile the files within Unity?
So Unity will do sort of like a pre-compile when you switch over to it to like figure out where to add like public stuff in your components, and then when you run the game, it sort of compiles the scripts again. Okay, has everyone got that? Anybody still need more time or have questions about it? Okay. Got it. Okay. All right, so then once we get back over here, now we need to attach this into our scene, onto the button. So click in the scene hierarchy over here on the start button, and then if you scroll down in the inspector, you'll see where there's a little list that says on click. This is where you can add functions, so anytime the button's clicked, these functions will be called. So we're just going to hit the little plus down here in the corner, and we need to select an object to call functions from. So we're just going to drag scene manager from the hierarchy into this spot right here. And then from no function, we're going to change this to scene controller and then load. And so what this is going to do, anytime that you click the button, it's going to go to this scene manager in our scene and call the load function. And then if you remember, that took in a string parameter for our scene name.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Where should I drag this one to?
So once you are in the little on-click area, you hit plus to add a new function. And then there'll be an empty spot right here for an object, for a game object that it can take in. That's where you drag the scene manager that we created in the scene onto that spot. And then we select a little drop down where it says function, go to scene controller that we just had, and click on load. Loads the function that we created. You'll see a bunch of other stuff in here. It's just the one that we made. And so that's why it's important that's why it's important to make your function public, because otherwise you won't be able to select it as a function to call.
Can you go over the script again?
Yes, all of the scripts are available online, so they're at tinyurl/game-scripts. So I'm not going to go over them right this second. So then here, where it takes in a parameter, we're just going to put in the name of the scene that we want to load. So in this case, it was level 1. And you got to make sure that it's exactly the same as the file that's saved. All right? And so then once we get to that, hit save to save the scene. And we'll just test it out by entering into play mode. And click start. And we got an error. So the problem is Unity needs to know which scenes are supposed to be loaded into memory at the time that it's running the game. So right now in the hierarchy, the only scene we see is menu and then all of the objects in our menu. Unity needs to know which other scenes it wants to keep track of. And this is especially important for bundling your final game because you don't want to include additional scenes that you're not necessarily going to have the player ever use. So we'll just exit play mode. And then the way that you load multiple scenes in is we'll go back to scenes in the file system.
But on GitHub, there's no script. I did not find the script for.
So it's tinyurl/game-scripts. It's a different link. So to load level 1 into memory, we just select it here in the file system and just drag it up into the scene hierarchy, just like we would a prefab or something like that. And so then we can see that it loads in level 1 and the menu are both open at the same time. We don't want both of them to be there, we just want Unity to keep track of them. So to unload level 1 but keep it in the bundle of scenes to be played, you just right click on level 1 and click unload scene. And then if we try again, enter play mode, and press the start button, it loads our level 1. So to drag the scene in, you just go to the file system down here, so under assets and scenes, and then you just select whichever scene you want to add onto the bundle and just drag it up into the hierarchy view. Does anybody have any questions?
How can I switch the subtitle to start?
So changing the name of the value of the text in the button, if you go to the canvas in your menu scene, and then the button, and then inside the button there's a text object, and there's just a text value here, and you can just change that to whatever you want. All right, so has everyone got the scene up and running and successfully switched from the menu scene to the level 1? If not, let someone know and we'll be around to help you. But we're going to move on now from scene management into animations. So we're going to switch back into our level 1. So if you right click on level 1 here and click load scene, and then we'll unload the menu scene. All right, so the first, yeah.
So a bunch of us are getting the error like invalid scene name or something.
Okay. So the scene name needs to be the same as whatever you save your scene. So mine's level 1.
Yeah. So wait, is it supposed to be like this right here, and then this essentially calls it as our
Yeah, that's the argument there.
So
Yeah. So I dragged scene 1 in. Yeah. So in order to set up multiple scenes, I just drag scene 1 in, and at that point you have menu and scene 1 are both loaded, and then you just unload scene 1. So this way you start on the menu, and then from the menu you can flow into scene 1. So no, if you're playing, like the way that it's set up right now, it's going to stay in the editor. Like if I enter play mode, I'm going to play level 1. If I want to start on the menu, then I have to load only the menu and unload every other scene. But then like if I'm on the menu and then I hit start and I switch to scene 1 and then I exit out of play mode, then it'll go back to just the menu being loaded. What do you mean?
You can have multiple scenes loading at the same time.
Yeah.
Why would it let you do that?
I don't know. Most of the time you don't want to work in multiple scenes because it's hard to know like what you're selecting and what scene it's a part of. So in terms of workflow, you pretty much always just want to have one scene open. Okay. So now that we're here, first thing I'm going to do before we move into animations is just clean up this scene a little bit. So I'm just going to organize because we got a lot of floor prototypes and stuff all chilling out here. So I'm just going to organize the scene a little bit. I'm going to create a couple empty objects. One object can be called platforms. And whenever you're creating a parent to child other game objects onto, make sure you always reset the parent to 0, 0, 0. And so then I'm just going to drag, all of these flooring items into the platforms.
Create empty or empty child.
Just create empty. You want this to be on the top level of the hierarchy. Yeah, and this isn't super important. This is more just making sure we're keeping the scene organized because as we get more and more objects, everything gets really confusing. And it's just good to keep a hierarchy of how the scene's set up. So I'm going to create another empty and call this pickups. Mhm.
What did you do after that? Sorry, we're just bouncing.
Oh, it's just connected the button, made sure that it works, and that you can have the menus in the, or that you have level 1 like loaded but unloaded in the hierarchy, right? And then just here, just kind of organizing the scene. So just putting all the platforms in one folder or one parent. Okay. So now I'm just going to give a sort of a brief overview of how the animation system works in Unity. So Unity uses something called keyframe animation, where you basically just set your object in a couple positions that you want it in time, and then Unity will sort of handle the movement between those, and it'll just flow naturally between positions. And so it's a pretty quick and easy way to make some simple animations. If you're doing anything more complicated really than just like up and down, left, right movement, I'd recommend using Blender or Maya or some other program to do animations. But Unity gives us a good sort of base level for moving objects in 3D space with animations. And the animation component is really powerful in that you can animate a lot of other things as well as in addition to just moving. So one thing that we're going to do now is I've got these windows here, the animator and animation. So in order to add these, just go to Window, Animation, and then click on Animation and Animator, and those will bring up the windows, and you can sort of put them wherever you want in your editor view. I've just got mine where the animator's on the same little window as the scene, and the animation is in the same window as the game. So what the animator does is sort of provides a flow between multiple animations, and you'll see this once we actually attach an animation to one of our objects in the scene, but it lets you sort of set up transitions between them and work without having to program to like flow on conditions between different animations. And it's useful for if you're, for example, you have a character that both has a running and walking animation, you have to switch between those two. And then the animation component is where you create the specific animations that you can chain together in the animator. I know the terminology is confusing. Thank you, Unity. Okay. So now we're also going to create a new folder under Assets. And we're just going to call this Animations. Okay, and so now we need to add an object that we want to animate. So what I'm going to do is just create a little sliding platform that goes back and forth, add a bit more of a challenge in our level. And so just like we did last week when we were setting up the scene, I'm going to go to Standard Assets, Prototyping, Prefabs, and then Floor Prototype 4x1x4, and just drag this into the scene. I'll reset the positioning of it, and then within the scene, I'm going to just drag this over so that it is, oops. I'm going to control drag it so that it snaps to the grid. Okay, or I guess it's Command on Mac. Just beyond the end of this lower platform. And then drag it up. So it ends up just right up here at the top of our platform.
So platforms is we may be duplicating the platform as well.
So I just dragged in one of the prefabs, the floor prototype 4x1x4, and just moved it up to position 0, 8, 16. And then I'm also going to shift it over a few blocks, so it's just to the right of the top platform. And then, just to keep it clear, I'm going to rename floor prototype 4x1x4 to moving platform. So has everyone gotten to this point? Does anybody have any questions about this? All right. And so now we're going to go in our little animation window down here, and where it says something about animating moving platform, we're just going to click Create. And it's going to give us an option to save our animation, and I'm just going to call this slide and save it in assets and animations. So now if we go into animations, we see that slide is an animation, and an animation controller for the moving platform was also created. So now if we go to animator, we can see that there's a couple objects in our animator scene. We've got our entry point and then slide. So at this point, there's no condition here on our flow chart. So if we hit play, our slide animation is just going to start. So I just saved it in assets and then animations, just a folder we created. I just named it slide. Yep.
And slide is a new animation.
So slide is a new animation, and then Unity at the same time creates moving platform, which is the animator. Yeah.
Just a random question. How do you make a portion of it the full screen for a certain amount of time to go back?
I'm not sure how it works on, I don't know if Windows has the same ones, but if you do like the zoom in like you would on sort of a web page on the trackpad, you can just go over a window and make it full screen. And then just zoom out to reset it again.
Okay.
So if you just click on the platform, like in the scene, and then go to the animation tab, it should say there's no animation attached to this, create. And then just click create and it'll ask you where to save it. Okay, so now that we've got our animation created, we can begin to edit it. So I'm going to select on the moving platform that we have, and if you look down in the animation window, we've got a couple objects or a couple things that we can look at. So up in the top corner, we have just sort of like film controls, so play, skip to the next frame, record. It also shows right below that samples. I don't know if you can see that on this screen, but it shows that the animation is going to be running at 60 samples or 60 frames per second. And then over here to the right, we've got just a time graph with where we would have keyframes if we added them, which we'll be doing in just a second. And so we can also see that our animation right here is called slide. So we're selected on the correct animation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and add a property. So because the Unity animator is really powerful, you can animate not just position, but you can animate stuff to do with the mesh. You could change the collider, you can change particle effects, almost anything that you can do with scripting, you can do with animation. And it's really helpful, especially if you're not big into coding, because outside of really complex stuff, almost everything visually can be done with the animator as opposed to writing out code for it. And most of the time, the animator is a lot faster and easier than trying to work with just code to tell something to move to different positions. So what we're going to do, we're going to click Add Property, and then Transform. You see there's a little drop down. And so we can animate the position or the rotation or the scale. In this case, we just want to animate the position. So we'll hit the little plus right here. And as you can see, we've just dropped in a new, we've dropped in a new keyframe at 0 frames and 60 frames. And so we can now play the animation, and nothing happens because we didn't change its positioning at all. But if you look down here, these little dots here are called keyframes. And so if we move where the platform is during one of those keyframes, Unity will figure it out and adjust to move it back and forth. Yeah. On which part? So did you click on the moving platform? Okay. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to animate our keyframe right here at 60 seconds. So you can just hit this little forward arrow to go to the next keyframe.
Moving platform, create empty.
And so you should see that right here in the corner, it says 60, just to make sure that we're on the correct frame. So this is going to be at 1 second. And so then in order to capture the motion, we're going to hit record. So just a little recording button. And so now you can see that if you look over in the inspector, the values for position have turned red. That indicates that they're being recorded. And so at this point, if we adjust the values at all for position, it'll be saved to the animation. So what I'm going to do is just move the platform over to x equals 4, just so it slides on over to the other side. And then exit record mode.
Oh, not this one.
And so now if you jump back between the keyframes, you'll see that it moves from the starting position where we just had it over to its final position. And if you press play, you see it slides between the two and jumps back at the beginning. So we don't really want it to just be jumping back. We kind of want a smooth motion between the platform. So we're going to add another keyframe in, and we're going to do that at 120 frames, so 2 seconds in. And you can move to 120 by going to the little value right here where it's your current frame and just typing in 120. And your cursor might jump out of this viewpoint here, but you can just scroll out in order to see it. And then once we get here, we're just going to click this little button that says Add Keyframe.
Where does the slide come from?
What do you mean?
Slide.
Oh, that was the animation that we created and saved. So when you clicked on the moving platform and clicked Create in the animation tab here, it gave you an option to save a new animation, and we just titled that Slide. That's currently what we're working on, the animation that we're on. Okay, and then once we've got our second keyframe here, we want to change this position again. So go ahead and hit the record. and we're going to switch its transform back down to -4, or wherever it initially started, and then exit record mode. And so now if we play our animation, we should see that, maybe that won't play if I'm in full screen, but if we play the animation, we should see that the platform is smoothly moving between the two positions.
How to let the move object like back and forth?
What do you mean?
How should I let the object move back and forth?
So we went over just putting in a keyframe. There's just a little button that says plus right here. And then you hit the record button, and that will save your position. And then, so essentially what this is doing, if you drop down, you can see like the full values at the keyframes. So at our first keyframe, we've got an X position of -4, Y position of 8, and Z position of 16. And then at the next frame, the X position is at 4, not -4. And then at the last frame, it jumps back to 4. And so this is, over the course of 2 seconds, going to move from -4 to 4 to -4, and just give us this nice smooth motion. Yeah?
I was just gonna, so it doesn't matter like when you use original animation. Like as long as you set the time, it doesn't matter like how fast you drag it or how like move it.
Yeah, oh yeah. So hitting the record is just going to be saving a value for the keyframe.
And then it just fits it in that time.
Yeah. So when I'm on record here, so for example, I'm on the last keyframe right here. Record is just going to be saving whatever 3 values are up here when I'm done. So it doesn't matter if I move it back and forth, back and forth. It's not recording what I'm actually doing. It's a little confusing in that way. But all it's doing is saving the final value when I hit stop. And then it's setting a keyframe there. So it's going to just jump between the first keyframe to the second keyframe to the third keyframe, just in smooth motion. Yeah?
My platform's moving erratically.
Okay, it's possible that you've added a couple extra frames in there. So sometimes if you weren't on a frame when you, like if I, for example, click here and move my character right here to the middle, and then if I was to like press plus or hit the record button, Unity's going to insert a frame for me, and that can be confusing, especially because sometimes it'll put frames like it'll put a keyframe like 1 frame away from another one, and so you'll see like some jumping around movement. But the only thing that you really should see is a frame at 1 second, a frame at 0 seconds, a frame at 1, and a frame at 2. And you can check that by pressing the forward and backward, like the go to the next keyframe button, and it should just go from 0 to 1 to 2, and then be done. And so you probably also noticed that it's moving fairly smoothly between the different points. So Unity by default lerps your animations. So they'll like move slowly at the beginning and then speed up and then slow down toward the end. So it's a very smooth motion. But you don't always want that when you're animating. And so you can actually go in and change the specifics in this little tab right down here at the bottom called curves. And so I'm not going to mess with it for this one, but we'll mess around when we animate our pickups. But here you can see the curves, and this is another way that you can edit values a little bit more precisely, and you can give some more specified behavior by like adding tangent points and adjusting how the curve actually looks. All right, so has everyone gotten to this point? Okay, if you've got the animation, go ahead and just save the scene, and you can enter play mode and try it out. So I guess it's not super apparent on mine just because my computer's not doing too hot right now. But the platform's moving pretty quickly. It's really hard to get across if you try to balance on the platform. And so we need to slow this down a little bit. We could go into the animation and just drag out these keyframes here, but that's kind of sloppy, and we've got a good set value with just a 2-second animation. So another way that you can change the duration of an animation is through the animator component. So if you switch to the animator window, and if you click on the slide animation that we have, and then over in the inspector, you see where there's a speed value. Currently it's set at 1. We can slow down the animation by setting it to some fractional value. So I'm just going to set mine at 0.3. And so now whenever the animation plays, it's going to play at a third time speed, roughly. So it should take about 6 seconds for the platform to go from side to side. Yeah.
Navigate your way around the base layer animator because it's mine's really zoomed out.
So you can scroll to zoom in and out.
Yes.
And then I don't know how you move left and right.
So you have to like just scroll in a certain area.
You can do that. I think A selects all of them, so it should center it in your view.
Okay.
Like if you just press A.
There's like a red exit button.
Yes. Yeah. So we're not going to worry about the exit for this tutorial because we just want the animation to keep going forever. All right, does anybody have any questions? So speed, if you go to the animator, so not the, yeah, the animator, and click on slide, or whatever you've titled it.
Oh, okay.
And then change to a fractional value.
What does that actually change? It seems like it's the same.
What, speed?
Yeah.
Are you on the correct, are you changing the correct thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm like playing the animation and I'm changing it. Is that fine?
I don't know that it's going to change it when you're not in game. It probably will.
Oh, I forgot how to in the slide record button, then setting the time.
So whenever you're on the record button, if you're not on a keyframe, it's going to create a new keyframe. So you want to make sure that you're on a keyframe or you're in a position where you want to add a keyframe. And then you'll hit record, and then on the keyframe you change the value. So for example, if I'm here and I have the scene loaded and I hit record, you see that the values up here have turned red. So if I was to change one of these values, it would change the value at this key.
Suddenly the moving platform suddenly went downward into the random position.
So if you are on record and then you move it to a new spot, it'll add in a keyframe if you're not already on a keyframe, and then that can cause weirdness with Unity figuring out where to move it because, for example, if you have it moving in some sort of unrealistic direction, it could have to move very quickly to get to a position that's farther away. All right. So now that we've got our platform set up, it'd be nice to be able to move it around maybe and create a couple other platforms, but we're going to run into an issue if we go here. So for example, if I move this platform over to this area and then press play, we see that it just snaps back to the original position. So if you want to see that again, I just dragged the platform over a little bit because I wanted to maybe move it in the game. You see on the first frame, it snaps immediately back over to the start of the animation. And that's because all of our animation, what it's going to be doing is just going to be going between those two keyframes. But the frame of reference for the animation is just the world. So all of the animation, the only thing that it knows is that at frame 0, it should be at -4, 8, 16. And then frame 60, it should be at this spot. And then at frame 120, it should be at this spot. So you can't, if you create an animation this way, you can't actually move the object around. What we need to do, we need to be animating in relation to some fixed parent. So what we need to do, we need to create a parent object around our moving platform. So I'm just going to move this guy back to wherever it was.
Oh,
Maybe.
what's wrong with that?
Okay.
Suddenly moving forward.
So what we're going to do, we're just going to create and then create empty. I'm going to rename this platform parent. Feel free to come up with more creative names. I'll reset its position to the origin. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to take our moving platform and put it underneath the platform parent. And so now Unity handles all of the logic behind that. And now all of the animations are going to be done in relation to where the parent is positioned. And so by moving the parent, we can move the whole animation system as one, and we can just put it in a different position. So, for example, if I select the parent here, move it over this direction, and then save and press play. Now we see the animations taking place over here. So with animations, because of how Unity does its coordinate system, you almost always want to have an animated object as the child of some other object that you can move around. So now that we've got a moving platform, we're just going to add a quick animation to our pickups here, just to make them a little bit more visually appealing. And this time we're going to start off by creating a parent of the pickup. So this way we don't have to do it retroactively after already creating the animation. So I'm going to go to create empty, and I'll call this pickup parent. Reset its position. And then I'll just take one of the pickups, for example, the first one, and put it underneath pickup parent. And then now we need to add an animation to pickup. So I'll just go in here and click create, and I'm going to call this pickup. Yeah.
Were we supposed to reset the platform?
So whenever you're childing an object to something, you almost always want to have the parent reset to the origin, because otherwise what Unity will do, it'll take the child and stretch out its coordinates to fit the parent. And so then if you like move the child, it puts the child's coordinates in a weird position. And so especially if the parent is like outside the origin, or if it's scaled differently, then the children are going to behave strangely within it. Yeah.
So we create the animation for one of the items?
Yes.
Going to give the animation to all of the items?
Yeah, so I'll go over that. All right, and so once we've got our pickup underneath its pickup parent, and we've added the animation to it called pickup, we're just going to go ahead and create a couple keyframes. So I'm going to add a property. This time just add position, and rotation. So this is kind of up to you, however you want to figure out the pickups to look. I'm just going to have mine sort of bob up and down a little bit and rotate. So in order to do that, for the position, in the middle, so at 30 seconds, or 30 frames I mean, I'm going to add another keyframe. And so here you can see that I'm keeping this animation to 1 second long. Since we can scale them very easily within the animator, you can basically set the animation duration to however long you want. And so then I'm going to add keyframe, and I'm just going to change its position. So here I'm just in orthographic mode. I'm going to hit record and then change its position just to go up a little bit. So I'll set that to, say, 0.8 for the Y. And then exit record mode. And then viewed from the top. I'm going to rotate it as well. So in order to do this rotation, I'm basically just going to have it spin one complete cycle every 1 second. So we don't need to have like an ending position as well as a starting position, since spinning it around one time is the same as not spinning it at all. And so I'm just going to double check that my keyframes are good. So you should see, if you go through the keyframes for position, the first one you've got a Y value of 0.5. And then step forward to the next one, it's 0.8 or whatever you set it to. And then the last one is 0.5. And so this will make sure that it bobs up and down in a regular manner. And then for the rotation, at this point I'm going to hit the record once I'm on the last keyframe here. And I'm just going to switch to the rotate function and just rotate this along the Y direction about 360 degrees.
So is it possible to have it rotate 360 degrees by only typing stuff into the rotation field?
Yes, I just didn't look at what the offset was initially. So let me undo that. So initially Y is 60, so I guess you want it to be
420.
420 or negative 300. We'll do 420. It just changes which direction it's going to rotate. Okay, and then exit record mode. And so now, if I put this back in a bit of a better view, we should see that playing the animation bobs it up and down fairly quickly, and it spins. But if you look at how it's spinning, I know it's not super apparent on my screen, it's not spinning very smoothly. It speeds up and slows down, and we just kind of want it to continually spin in a regular pattern. And so we need to go into the curve sheet at this point and click on the rotation. And it might be like kind of zoomed in or something. Okay. Oh, there we go. So Unity's not doing the greatest job on the zooming here. But if you look at the curve for our Y rotation, you see that it's lerped, so it's like smooths toward the end. But since we're beginning and ending at the same point, we don't want it to, there shouldn't be a reason that it stops at a certain point. So we need to change how the curve is shaped. So we can do that by adjusting the tangents at the points that we have for keyframes. So if we click right here on our end point, and then you'll see that a little gray bar with a dot on the end shows up. That's the tangent at that value. And so we can adjust the tangent down. And if you see, it makes the curve straighter. And then do the same thing at the other point and just adjust it up. And so now we have a fairly straight line going up. Maybe it's a little curved, but there we go. And so that means that we're going to, in this case, instead of lerped motion, we're just going to have linear motion where it goes directly from keyframe to keyframe without any speeding up or slowing down. So now if we hit play, we see that it spins at a much more regular rate. Still kind of fast. So does anybody have any questions about how curves work or how to change the rotation of an object? Yeah.
What does the platform parent contain?
So platform parent just contains one platform, and that's because you have to child the platform if it has an animation in order to move it around in the scene.
When you move in from under main,
Do you change the change at the second key point?
Yes, I changed it on both key points.
Oh, on both.
Yeah. You can also add in additional key values just on the curve. I think you just right click, maybe. Yeah. And then click add key. And then at those points you could change the tangent without actually changing the value, so you can make it do all sorts of weird stuff. So I'm also going to just slow this animation down a bit. So switching back to the animator tab, I'll just click on the pickup and I'll put its speed to maybe 0.5. So it completes a rotation now every 2 seconds. Alright, so at this point, we've got everything looking pretty good in terms of the two animations there, and we probably want to duplicate them a bit more, so we're just going to turn them straight into prefabs. So I'm going to drag pickup parent into our prefabs folder, and I think I'll just rename this something like floating pickup. And same thing with the platform parent. We'll just rename this moving platform. And so now that we've got those in the scene, we can go ahead and create a couple more. So I'm just going to go up here and add some more moving platforms. And so then you can drag the moving platform that I just dragged into the scene and just move it, let's say right here. So we'll just create like a little line of platforms. Same thing with this one. So reset that and then move it down here. All right. So at this point, we've now got 3 moving platforms, but if we save our scene and play it, we'll see that it's kind of boring because all of them move at the exact same time, right? We don't want that. We want them maybe to be offset so it's a little bit harder for the player to go through. So here's where our second 3 lines of coding for the night comes in. So if you click on moving platform and then click on its child moving platform, very well named code here. This is the one with the animation component specifically attached to it, or the animator here. We're going to add a script to that, and we're just going to call this script, what did I call this? Animation offset. Create a new script, create an add, and then I'm just going to organize this in my assets folder to move animation offset into scripts. All right, and so then I'm going to open up animation offset, and we can get rid of the update function because we're not going to need that. We just need to call something on start. And then we also want to add a public variable in order for our player to change, or to change in the editor how much we want each animation to be offset. So I'm just going to call this public float offset. And we're not going to give it a default value because floats default at 0, and it makes sense for our animations to default with 0 offset. And then there's another cool thing that Unity lets you put into your C# scripts to interact with them sort of at a level just above the code. So we're going to add in this value right above public float offset. We're just going to do open braces and then range and then parentheses 0, 1. So what this is going to do, normally, in the editor, if you have like a public int or a public float, you can just type in the value. By putting in the range 0, 1, what Unity is going to do is going to put in a little slide bar, and so it'll restrict the value between 0 and 1, and the user can just slide between those two, as opposed to having to enter in some other value. And that's important because in terms of the animation, our offsets are going to be between 0 and 1, 1 being a full offset, so starting back where it normally begins, and then 50% would be halfway through its animation, or 0.5 would be halfway through its animation. Yeah.
Why do you still have this for initialization part?
We'll get to it. Yeah, we just need to keep the start function because there's something we have to do at the beginning of the scene. All right, and then we're going to need another public variable. This one a string. And we'll just call this animation name. Because of the way that Unity's starting animation function works, you need to give it a name as well. You can't just give it an animator component. It's a little awkward. And then we also want to add an animator component as well. So that's how we're going to be able to hook into the animator. And so this is similar to how we added our rigid body when we were doing that to create the player. So we'll just have a private animator, and we'll just call this animator. And so similarly to how we did with the rigid bodies, in the start function, we just say animator equals get component, animator, parentheses, semicolon.
Oh.
All right, and so then now that we've got our animator, we need to start our animation. So by doing this in the script, rather than letting Unity by default start the animation where it, when the scene loads, just start it at the beginning and just run it forever, we're going to explicitly tell Unity where to start the animation. And so we'll just add the one line saying animator So this is the component attached to whatever the script is attached to, dot play. And then here we've got a couple values that we're going to put in. So the first one is the name of the animation. So that's going to be animation name, and that's a value we have to remember to set in the editor. And then -1, just because Unity. And then offset. So what this is going to do, it's going to start whatever animation we selected and start it at a certain value between 0 and 1 from where it normally would begin. So save this, and then going back to Unity, once it compiles, you can see now we've got our little offset value down here in the corner. That's very large. And so it's just a slider that we can move between 0 and 1. And then we've got the animation name as well. And so this one, we're just going to put in the value slide, because that's what this is. That's the animation that we're looking for here. And then you'll see that we're modifying the moving platform in the scene. And so this moving platform has an animation offset script attached to it, but our other moving platforms don't. But since this moving platform is a prefab, we can go up here and at the top, underneath the name and the tag, there's a value that says prefab. And if we click apply, what this will do, it'll copy the all of the values that are different from this prefab as opposed to the one that we have saved down here, and apply those and apply it to everything else in the scene as well. And so this is sort of like save a copy of the prefab, like update the prefab. So we hit apply. There. And then if we go over here back to this moving platform, we see that it's got an offset as well. And it's already filled in the animation name, and it's probably set the offset to 0. So now that we've got this, I'm just going to go ahead and offset our moving platforms. So the first one, I'll give it an offset of 0. The next one, I'm going to give this an offset of, let's say, 0.1. And the last one, I'll give an offset of 0.2. And I'm also going to take this minute to organize the moving platforms. Just create an empty. It's always good to just keep stuff organized in the scene. And we'll just call this moving platforms. There we go. Now we've got all our moving platforms down in one spot, and they've all got offsets if you went and set those values. And so now if we save our scene and enter play mode, we should see all of them begin at a slightly different spot. And so it sort of forms this, I guess, like snaking.
When you duplicate it, as a drag it to this since we just applied that stuff, I need to wait for well, like, yeah, I think you want to reset it.
Yeah.
When I play my animations, they all like snap back to the same. They're all layered on top.
They're all snap back.
Okay. So when you when you're like moving them to offset, you need to make sure that you're offsetting their parent. So you've got like the platform that has the animator attached to it, and then it's under like the moving platform, right? you need to move the top layer of it, not the inside one. So right here, we've got the moving platform and then the cleverly named moving platform within it. To move the whole animation and everything, we need to move the parent here. So not the inside one, but the one that's a step up.
So do I need to reset the position of the parent?
So yeah, if you reset the position, it's probably going to be right where the initial one was. So like the parent's going to be at whatever this is. The parent will be at 0, 0, 0, and the transform of the object inside is going to be at like -4, 8, 16.
Yeah.
And so you need to move the parent if you want to move the whole animation. Yeah.
When you created the prefab for the moving platform, did you create it from the second level?
That's a good point. So also when I created the prefab for the moving platform, it was the parent, the one that was reset at 0, 0, 0 without the animator. So like over here, just a position. That's what I dragged down into the prefab folder. So with animations, it's really confusing. So whenever you're dealing with the animations, you almost always have the animation inside some sort of shell game object, because otherwise animations they'll like snap back to the original position and weird stuff like that. So you almost always have it as like the parent. Yeah. Oh my god, too fast. Okay. Repeat this. Yep. Sure. Yeah.
So when you drag a new prefab from the onto it, I assume you reset it to 0, 0.
Yes. So what 0, 0 probably looks like in terms of dragging the prefab on, it'll probably be like in this position up here, wherever we did the animation initially.
Yeah.
And then you just offset it based on that.
And are you gonna offset the second level or the bottom level?
So you offset the parent,
The parent, okay, yeah, the parent, sorry.
and then so like here my parent's just set at z equals 8.
Okay.
Here the parent's set at 0, and then this one's z equals 4.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I guess a good way to think about it is that anything that's like a global positioning, you want to have the parent is the one that you're moving around in the scene. The child is just kind of, it's got the animation, it's got the object, everything is like in the child, but the parent is just sort of your position.